We are up to the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, about 7 lines down from the top. Amar of Gidol, Amar Rav. This is a little bit of a new sugya, a little bit related to before. Rav Gidol says in the name of Rav, Kohen she'achol mechatas va'asham lifnei zrika. If you have a Kohen who eats from a carbon chatas or an asham lifnei zrika, before the sprinkling of the blood, we know that a Kohen is not supposed to, loke, he gets malchus. We know that a Kohen is not supposed to, a Kohen is a carbon chatas and a carbon asham is eaten by the Kohen. Only. Nobody else is supposed to eat that. Now we know you're only supposed to eat it once they did every carbon. You're not allowed to eat it until they sprinkle the blood on the mizbech. That allows you to eat it. So now here you have a Kohen who decided to eat from the carbon chatas or the asham before the sprinkling of the blood. So Rav Gidol is saying you're going to get malchus. Now the question is, where's the source for that? Show me any pasuk in the Torah that says don't eat the meat before the blood was sprinkled. It doesn't say that anywhere, seemingly. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Where's he coming from? Where Rav Gidol explains himself. The Amr Krab, because the pasuk says, listen to the pasuk, it says, quote, V'achlu osam asher kufar bahem. You should eat them that which you are atoned with them. End quote. The atoning, by the way, means when does a person get his atonement on a carbon? When they do the sprinkling of the blood. So it says you should eat them after asher kufar bahem, which you were atoned, which means the blood was sprinkled. And he darshans as follows. He makes a drasha. Le'achar kapara in, after the atonement, i.e., after the sprinkling of the blood, yes, you should eat it. Lefnei kapara lo, but before the sprinkling of blood, you should not be eating it. In other words, what Rav Gidol is saying is, you see from this pasuk, the pasuk says, eat it after the sprinkling of the blood. Now, seemingly that is a positive commandment. This is not a negative. We know you only get malchus, as we learned many times. You only get malchus if you transgress a negative commandment which has an action. Now, this pasuk says, eat it after the sprinkling of the blood. So, and he said as follows, Lav haba michlal asay. If you have a negative commandment which is derived from a positive commandment, lavhu, it has a status of being a lav, which is a very big chiddush, which is a novel idea. What he's saying is as follows. When the Torah says, eat it after the sprinkling of the blood, basically, you're supposed to understand from there is, don't eat it before the sprinkling of the blood. Again, if I have a positive commandment that says, eat it after the sprinkling of blood, that means basically the Torah is saying, don't you dare eat it before the sprinkling of blood. So that's a negative commandment derived from a positive commandment. In other words, that sometimes the Torah says, do something, and it's implied that you should not be doing the opposite of that. So the Torah says, as a positive commandment, you should go eat the karbanos after sprinkling of the blood. In essence, the Torah is saying, but don't eat it beforehand. Now, I would have said that's something coming off a positive commandment. Seemingly, it should have the status of a positive commandment. Rav Gidol is saying, no. Since it's a negative commandment that you're learning, so it has a status of a negative commandment, and you could get malchus for that, which is fascinating. So even though the Torah says it as an asay, but since it's an implying a lav over here, therefore, it has a status of a negative commandment, and you'll get malchus for it. To which the Gemara asks, Masiv Rava. Now, Rava is coming to attack this concept, that if the Torah tells me a positive way of doing something, you obviously derive from there that you should not be doing the negative of that. Does that have the status of a lo saseh, a negative commandment, or does that have a status of a positive commandment? So Rava challenges this. Rava says, Rava asks, the pasuk says, quote, V'chol behema mafreses parsa. Every animal which mafres parsa, it has split hooves, v'shosas shesa, shtei prasas, right? It's got its hooves are split all the way in the front and the back of the animal, front and back of the leg. Ma'alaz gera. Ma'alaz gera means it chews its cud. We know these are the two simanim, these are the two signs that tell us an animal is kosher. It's got split hooves all the way, and it chews its cud. The Torah says, Babehema in a behema, osa tochelu, that you should eat. End quote. So the Torah is telling you if it has these two characteristics, chews its cud and split hooves all the way, then you should eat it. That is a positive commandment. That's telling you to go do something. Now, what can we deduce from there? Rava says, osa tochelu, that you should be eating, ve'ein be'ema acheres tochelu, and no other animal should you be eating. In other words, Rava is saying this is similar to what Rav Gidol was saying. let's deduce a negative commandment from this, because it says only an animal with two simanim, with the two signs, you should eat. But an animal that does not have the two signs, I should not be eating. So similarly, I already have a negative commandment to eat a pig or to eat a camel, because a camel and a pig both have one of the simanim, one of the signs. They don't have both. So similarly, if one eats a pig, it's already a negative commandment according to Rav Gidol. It's a negative commandment derived from a positive commandment. Even though the Torah didn't say it specifically, it already has a status of a negative commandment if Rav Gidol's right. Now Rava says, V'i kida ka'amrit, if it's like you, Rav Gidol, are saying, that I already know there's a negative commandment on eating any other animal which does not have both signs, when the Torah says, quote, ezeh lo sochelu, end quote, the Torah says, the following animals you should not eat. Don't eat a pig, don't eat a camel. Lamali, what do I need that for? So in other words, Rav is asking, if you are, in other words, we know that the Torah says there's a negative commandment to eat a pig, there's a negative commandment to eat a camel, there's a negative commandment to eat any animal that doesn't have both signs. He doesn't, you have to have two. If he doesn't chew his cud and have split hooves, there's a negative commandment explicit in the Torah. So Rav is asking very simply, if you're right, that every negative commandment derived from a positive commandment takes on the status of a negative commandment, so then why does the Torah have to say it again? Must be, Rav says, you're wrong. You, Rav Gidol, you're wrong. And when the Torah gives you a positive commandment and you derive the negative from there, that negative only has the power, it can be no better than the source it's coming from. It retains the status of an asay. So what Rav is suggesting, if a Kohen eats the meat of the carbon before the sprinkling of the blood, yes, it's prohibited to do, but at best it's a positive commandment. It's not a negative commandment, and therefore you can't get malchus for it. And therefore Rav says, now it makes sense by the animals. The Torah says, if it has two signs, you should eat it. You could eat it if it has two signs. You could derive from there. If it does not, you should not eat it, which means you are transgressing a positive commandment. You are actively transgressing a positive commandment, but you won't get malchus for it. That's why the Torah has to add on and say, besides that, there's a negative commandment, and then you'll get malchus for it. In other words, Rav is saying, I understand why the Torah would have to add on a negative commandment onto a positive commandment. But if Gidol's right, I already know a negative commandment. I don't need two negative commandments. So this is Rava's Yisod, and so Rava is asking on Rav Gidol, seemingly you're not correct what you're saying. This that you're saying, a lav haba mechlal say, which means a negative which comes from positive, is treated like a negative. Rava is saying that's not true. You see from here that it's treated as a positive, and therefore you're not going to get malchus for a Kohen eating the chatas before the sprinkling of blood. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The Gemara says, Ella I itzmar, if you're going to say it, hachi itmar, this is how you should say it. Meaning it sounds like whoever quoted Rav Gidol obviously quoted him, was misquoting him, and this is what Rav Gidol really said. So scratch what we said before. Rava is correct, and yes, at best it'll be a positive commandment. So what did Rav Gidol really say? He said as follows, totally different halacha, a little similar, that Amr Rav Gidol Amar Rav, Zar. Zar is a strange person, meaning a non-Kohen, literally means somebody strange, somebody who doesn't belong, referring to a non-Kohen, Sha'acho michatas v'asham, a non-Kohen who eats from the carbon michatas v'asham, lifnei zrika, before the sprinkling of the blood, pater, he is pater. Now here's a chiddush over here, right? A non-Kohen is not allowed to ever eat a carbon chatas and asham. Carbon chatas and asham, strictly for Kohanim. So if it will be after the sprinkling of the blood, this person would be chayev. He's over an isser and he should get malchus for that. But if he eats it before the sprinkling of the blood, he's pater. Again, it's not mutter to do, right? It's not something he should be doing, but he's pater. My timer, what's the reason? Because the pasuk says, quote, "Va'achlu osam asher kufar b'hem." It says you should eat them that which you sher kufar b'hem, that which you are atoned with them. Now he says as follows. That's the end of the quote. Kol hecha de karina be, anywhere where we're able to read, quote, v'achlu osam asher kufar b'hem, if we're able to read the beginning of the pasuk that says, eat it because you are atoned with it, karina be, we could read the end of the pasuk which says, quote, v'zar lo yochol ki kodesh, and a non-Kohen should not be eating it because it's kodesh, which is the end of that pasuk. Meaning, the end of the pasuk says a non-Kohen should not be eating this meat, and if he does, he transgressed a negative commandment and he'll get malchus. So if a non-Kohen eats chatas meat after the sprinkling of the blood, of course he's going to get malchus. But if I'm not able to read on this piece of meat, eat it because you are atoned, i.e. it's before the sprinkling of blood, lo karin be, we do not call on it, quote, v'zar lo yochol, that a zar should not be eating it. Again, what's his point in layman's language? What he's saying is as follows. If you look at the pasuk inside, there's a pasuk in Shmos, Chaf Tes Lam and Gimel. But the pasuk says, "Va'achlo asam asher kufar behem." It says you should eat that. You should eat them that which you were atoned with. L'malei shadam l'kodesh osam. That's part of the pasuk. The end of the pasuk says, "V'zar lo yochol ki kodeshim," and a non-Kohen should not be eating it. That's a negative commandment. So we all know if a non-Kohen eats carbon meat which he should not be eating, he gets malchus because of this pasuk. Now, what Rav Gidol's chiddush is, what about if he eats the meat, which the non-Kohen eats the meat, which wasn't yet appropriate for the Kohen? In other words, it was before the sprinkling of the blood. Even the Kohen should not be eating it then. Now, this Yisrael decided to eat it. So, again, it's wrong to do, but is he going to get malchus for that? So Rav Gidol is saying a chiddush. The two parts of the pasuk are connected. That it's only a lav for a Yisrael to eat meat which is permitted to a Kohen. But meat which was not yet permitted to the Kohen, it's not a lav. It's not. You don't read the end of the pasuk. So what he means by saying reading, when it says, anytime we're able to read, we're able to apply the beginning of the pasuk, which says, eat the meat because you are atoned, i.e. after sprinkling the blood, then we are able to read the end of the pasuk. The end of the pasuk applies to that don't eat it if you're not a Kohen. But if I'm not able to establish, to apply the beginning of the pasuk, which says, eat it, because it's before the sprinkling of blood, then the second half of the pasuk does not apply, and that, the negative commandment was not set on that. Again, it's not a good idea to be doing it, and it's definitely wrong, but you're pater from malchus. Good, that's the end of Rav Gidol. Now the Gemara goes off into a little bit of a new twist, a new thing over here. Back to Bikurim. We've been talking about Bikurim before we got into this whole Karbanis business, but way back in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin, we started with Bikurim. So, Amr Rav Elazar, Amr Rav Hoshia, he says, Bikurim, hanacha ma'keves behem. The hanacha means placing it down next to the Mizbeach. We know by Bikurim, you're supposed to put it down next to the Mizbeach, and you're also supposed to read all the psukim over there. If you look in the beginning of Parashas Kisavo, it describes exactly what you're supposed to be saying. So Rav Elazar says, before a Kohen eats it, hanacha, placing it down before the Mizbeach, prevents you from eating the Bikurim, but kriya ein ma'keves ben, but reading it does not prevent you from eating it. Meaning, if you didn't get around to reading the psukim and the Kohen ate it anyway, okay, it's not so bad. It's not ma'akev. Obviously, lechatchila, you should be doing that, but it doesn't prevent you from eating it. But if you didn't put it down next to the Mizbeach, that's a problem, and you cannot eat it. Obviously, we're talking about a Kohen. A regular non-Kohen is not allowed. A non-Kohen is not allowed to eat Bikurim. But we're talking about the Kohen. The Kohen is only allowed to eat it if the thing was put down next to the Mizbeach. If it was not, he's not allowed to eat it. If you didn't read the psukim, okay, it's not good, but it doesn't prevent you from eating it. That's Rabbi Elazar's halacha. To which the Gemara asks, Umi Amar Rabbi Elazar Hachi, at all did Rabbi Elazar say this? Is that true? Rabbi Elazar really said this? The Gemara is focusing on the second half of his statement, that if you don't read the psukim, that's okay. You don't actually always have to read the psukim. You're allowed to eat it even though you didn't read the psukim. Is that true? V'amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rav Hoshia. But Rabbi Elazar said in Rav Hoshia, Hifrish Bikurim Kodem L'chag. So just a little bit of background over here before we read the next line. Rashi actually speaks out over here that the halacha is when you bring Bikurim are your first fruit, which you're supposed to bring, so bring them to the Mizbeach. If you bring them before Sukkot, that is the time of Simcha, that's the time of the person's festive, more, he's bringing in his crops. If it's before the Chag of Sukkot, the halacha is you bring it and you're supposed to read the psukim. The psukim, again, the psukim that says in Parashas Kisavo. Arami, Ovid Avi, all the things we say by the night of the Seder. So, if you bring your Bikurim to the Beis Hamikdash before Sukkot, you're supposed to read all those psukim. If you brought it after Sukkot, until Chanukah, if I'm not mistaken, if you bring it, until Chanukah, Rashi says, if you bring it until Chanukah, you're still allowed to bring it, but you don't read the psukim. Okay, so in other words, if you picked your fruits after Sukkot, and you want to bring them to the Beis Hamikdash, so you bring it, but you're not obligated to read the psukim. So now, listen to the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar back in the Gemara. What if you have a fellow who separated the bikurim before Sukkot? You already took it off the tree, put it in the basket, it's all ready to go to Beis Mikdash. Va'avar aleim hachag, and for some reason he didn't get to the Beis Mikdash until after Sukkot. That's an interesting situation here. At the time he picked them and put them in the basket, he was ready to bring it, and he should be reading the psukim. But so if he would bring it before Sukkot, he would read all those psukim. What happened was, for whatever reason, he didn't get there, and it's now after Sukkot. So now it's a time you don't read the psukim. So the psak is, Rabbi Lazar said, Yir kavu. Yir kavu means you should let it rot. Why do you let it rot? Because these fruits, there's a problem with them. On one hand, I'm supposed to read, when I picked them, they were obligated to be read, the psukim on them, but I can't read the psukim because it's after Sukkot now. So you sort of, you shot yourself in the foot. Either if you pick them after Sukkot and you don't read the psukim, that's fine. If you pick them before Sukkot and you bring them for Sukkot and you read the psukim, that's great. But to pick something where it's obligated in reading the psukim, and now you're bringing it after Sukkot when you're not allowed to read the psukim, so you're sort of, you got yourself stuck over here. Because on one hand, I'm obligated to read the psukim, on the other hand, I can't. So therefore, what you do is you let the fruit rot and you don't bring it to the Beis Mikdash. That's not your bikurim. Don't eat them, don't bring them to a kohen, nothing. Now, the Gemara is saying, what does the Gemara want from this? What do you see from this? The Gemara says, my love, is it not? Mishum de lo matzi, because you're not able to mikri aleim. The reason why they have to let them rot, the reason you throw them in the garbage is because you're not able to read the psukim on them. Good. So notice, from this statement of Rav Oshia, Rabbi Lazar and the name of Rav Oshia, you see that if you're not reading the psukim on these things, it prevents you from bringing them, prevents you from eating them. That's why you have to let it rot. And here's the funny situation, you're stuck. Now, the Gemara says, if you're going to think, Kriya ein ma'keves ben, if you're going to tell me that reading the psukim does not prevent me from bringing bikurim, that even if I bring bikurim, like Rabbi Lazar originally said, what we started with, Rabbi Lazar said, Kriya ein ma'keves, that the kohen, it's okay if you don't read it. You're supposed to read it, but if you don't, it's fine. Why should you let it rot? So the Gemara is asking a very good question. Again, the two statements of Rabbi Lazar are as follows. Rabbi Lazar first said that if you happen to not read the psukim, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It doesn't prevent you from bringing the bikurim and allowing the kohen to eat the bikurim. On the other hand, he said this statement that if you started with bikurim, which the psukim are supposed to be read on them, and you bring them after Sukkot, those bikurim are pasul. Why? Because you can't read the psukim, and you're not going to read the psukim. That basically tells me that it does uphold the process by not reading the psukim. So Gemara is asking Rabbi Lazar, make up your mind. Does it prevent or does it not prevent? On one hand, you're telling me kriya ein ma'keves, which means reading it does not prevent it. On the other hand, you're telling me that if I bring it after Sukkot, then I have to let it rot because you're not able to read the psukim. Well, I thought you told me I don't have to read the psukim. So make up your mind. The Gemara answers, the Gemara answers, Kid Reb Zera. The answer is like Reb Zera. Reb Zera is a very famous thing brought many times throughout Shas. And that's the answer to that question based on Reb Zera's principle. Who's Reb Zera? To Reb Zera, because Reb Zera has said, Kol haro'ui lebila, anything which is fit to be mixed, ein bi'ila ma'keves bo, then mixing it does not prevent it. But v'chol she'ein haro'ui lebila, anything which is not fit to be mixed, bila ma'keves bo, then the mixing prevents it. What is this referring to? So if you look at Rashi over here, and that's the answer to that question, but we just have to understand what's this concept of Reb Zera over here. Rashi says, we're talking about over here, a fellow who says he's going to bring flour to the Beis HaMikdash, a flour carbon, a carbon mincha. So if he promises he's going to bring 60 isaron is a certain type of measurement, so he could bring 60 measurements, 60 isarons, again, it's a certain type of measurement. If he says, I'm going to bring 60 of these flour, let's call it cups, just for simplicity's sake. If the guy says, I'll bring 60 cups, you could put it all in one bucket or one pail or whatever, bring it all in one big basin, that's fine. But if a guy says, I want to bring 61, then he has to bring 60 in one and the other one in a different basket. So you put 60 in the first basket, one in the other basket. The Gemara says why. So Rashi speaks all this out. The answer is because 61 doesn't mix well. When you mix the oil with all the flour and everything, it doesn't mix well if you have 61 in one basket. Therefore, you need to separate it. Fine, very nice. That's a very simple halacha. So you put 60 in one basket, 1 in the other basket. The Gemara in Menachos asks, you're telling me I can't put 61 in one basket because it doesn't mix well? But the Gemara asks, what do you mean? There's a Mishnah that says, even if you never mix the flour and the oil together, you're still yotzei. It's okay. As long as you put them together, even if it doesn't mix, it's okay. So the Gemara asks, in Menachos, the Gemara in Menachos asks, so why do I have to separate the 60 and the 1? Because it won't mix well. Even if I never mixed it, I'm still yotzei. It still works. To which Reb Zera over there in Masechta Menachos answers, and this is, again, all over this principle is applied all over Shas, that there's a difference. As long as it's able to be mixed, even if you don't mix it, that's okay. In other words, you don't actually have to mix it. It just has to be able to be mixed. But if you put 61 in one vessel where it's not able to be mixed, that's a problem. So in other words, a lot of times you find that even if I don't actually have to actually do something, but at least has to be able to do something. Fine, whether you did it or not, that's irrelevant, but it has to be at least it's possible for it to happen. So if you bring 60 in one kli and 1 in the other kli, it's possible to mix it. If you actually don't mix it, okay, b'diavad you're yotzei. But if you put 61 in one kli, it wasn't even possible to be mixed, that's a problem. How does that apply to us? So the Gemara is saying the same thing. If you bring your bikurim, which you're able to read the psukim, but for whatever reason you didn't do it, that's okay. The kriya is not ma'akev. Kriya does not, reading the psukim does not prevent. But bringing your bikurim after sukkos, when you're not able to read it, that's a problem. So in other words, once again, something that's not able to be done, that's a problem. But if you're able to do it and you actually don't do it, that's not so bad. So now, you might ask, how are you allowed to bring karbanis after sukkah? How are you allowed to bring bikurim after sukkahs till Chanukah? The answer is, there the halacha is that it doesn't need to be read at all. So that's fine. But if you separated it before sukkahs, where it was supposed to be read, and now you bring it after sukkahs, where it doesn't even have the possibility to read the psukim, because you don't read psukim after sukkahs, that's why it has to rot. Because on one hand, it's chayiv to read the psukim. On the other hand, you're not allowed to. It's not possible to be read. Therefore, it has to rot. But in a different situation, when I brought it before sukkahs, and I just, for whatever reason, didn't read the psukim, that's okay. That's a minor detail. I didn't read it, but it was possible to read it, and therefore it's not a problem. Good. That's the Gemara's answer. We read that again now that we understand it. The Amr B'Zera, Kalaroy Labila, anything which is fit to be mixed, i.e., if there's 60, up to 60 in one vessel, Ein Bila Ma'keves, the mixing does not prevent. Even if you actually did not mix it, that's okay. But if it's not fit to be mixed at all, it's not possible, then Bila Ma'keves, then the mixing will prevent. If you have a situation where it's not possible to mix it, that's a problem. And again, this could apply to many different things all over Shas. The Gemara applies this many places. New thing over here. The Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov Masila ki Rav Asi. He taught like Rav Asi. Amr Rabbi Yochanan. He taught this in the name of Rav Asi, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, meaning the above, what we just said, that placing the bikurim prevents you from eating it. If you don't place it, you're not allowed to eat it. But reading it does not prevent. The Kashalei Rabbi Yochanan, he learned this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore he had a contradiction in Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, this statement that we just said before in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Rav Acha learned it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore he had a contradiction. Why? He said, Umiyam Rabbi Yochanan, did Rabbi Yochanan say, Bikurim hanacha ma'keves ben, that placing it prevents you from eating it, the coin. Kriya ema keves ben, Kriya ema keves ben, but the Kriya does not prevent it. Is that true? But Rav Asi asked from Rabbi Yochanan, he asked him the following question. Bikurim me'emasai mutar l'kohanim. The bikurim fruit. From when is it mutar for a kohen to eat it? Now look who he asked. He asked Rabbi Yochanan. He asked Rabbi Yochanan, when is it mutar for a kohen to eat the bikurim? Va'amar lei, and he said to him, listen to his answer, Haru'uyim l'kriya, if they are fit to be read the psukim on them, i.e. it's before sukkos, mishakar aleim. Once you read the psukim, now the kohen's allowed to eat it. What do I see from there parenthetically? You see from there that if you don't read the psukim, you cannot eat it. That's contradiction number one. Because on one, you told me the statement, Rabbi Yochanan said, Kriya is not makiv. Reading the psukim is not makiv. Well, he just said, if it's before sukkos, you only could eat it once you read it. So it sounds like it is Makkot. Okay. Then he also said, V'she'ein ro'in l'kriya, if it's not fit to be read, Mishiro pnei abayis, from when it comes into the bayis, is referring to the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi says, once it comes into the Azara, as long as it entered the courtyard, even if you didn't put it down, once the Bikurim was brought into the courtyard, you could already eat it. Good. So again, let's focus on this last statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Again, in English, they walked over to Rabbi Yochanan and they said, when is a Kohen allowed to eat Bikurim? So he said, it depends. If this is a type of Bikurim that you normally read the Psukim on, i.e. it's before Sukkot, then the halacha is only once you read the Psukim, then the Kohen can eat it. If it's after Sukkot, when you're not reading the Psukim anyway, so when does it become fit for a Kohen? It becomes fit for a Kohen to eat it once you bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, into the courtyard. Now you see two things from there. You see, first of all, Kriya is ma'akiv. Reading the Psukim is ma'akiv. It does prevent you from eating it. That's what he said. You can only eat it once you read the Psukim. That's a contradiction to what we said before in Rabbi Yochanan. Second of all, he says, once it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, you could eat it. If it's after Sukkot. What does that tell you? That you don't need to put it down. So, I thought Rabbi Yochanan says that to put it down does prevent you from eating Bikurim. In other words, the first statement we said in the name of Rabbi again, originally we said in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Rav Acha came along and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, putting it down prevents, reading does not prevent. And now, Rabbi Yochanan is saying the exact opposite. Reading prevents, putting it down does not prevent. So, make up your mind, it's a double contradiction. The Gemara says, Kasha kriya akriya, we have a question, reading on reading. Kasha hanacha hanacha, we have a question, putting down on putting down. No, it's a double contradiction. To which the Gemara answers, kriya akriya lo kasha. Reading on reading is not a question. Meaning, on one hand, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, reading the Psukim prevents you from eating the Bikurim. On the other hand, he says, it doesn't prevent you. That's not a question. Very simple answer. Harab Shimon, Harabanan. One is going, Rabbi Yochanan's an Amora. In one place, he's teaching like Rabbi Shimon. Another place, he's going like the Rabbanan. Who's Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan? As we learned before on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, if you'll remember, that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kiva both say that reading the Psukim, like our Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin, that reading the Psukim prevents you from eating the Bikurim. That's Rabbi Shimon's whole thing from the Pasuk. And Rabbi Kiva holds that way also, parenthetically. The Chachamim argue, and the Chachamim say, if you remember on Daf Yud Zayin, the Chachamim say, Kriya ein ma'akeves ben. So Gemara's answer, you have a kasha in Rabbi Yochanan, in one place he says the Kriya prevents, one place he says it doesn't. One he's going like Rabbi Shimon, one he's going like the Rabbanan. Again, he's not Mora, and sometimes he said like this Tana, sometimes like that Tana. It's not a contradiction. Good. Now, the Gemara says, Hanacha, Hanacha, Nami lo kasha. What about putting down on putting down? In one place, Rabbi Yochanan says, putting down prevents it. The other place he says, even if you don't put it down, you could still eat it. Nami lo kasha, it's also not a question. Har Reb Yehuda v'har Rabbanan. One is based on Reb Yehuda, and one is based on the Rabbanan. Who's Reb Yehuda and who's the Rabbanan? We're about to see. My Reb Yehuda. So before that, actually, Rashi speaks out. If you look at the Psukim over here, the Psukim in Parshas Kisavo, very interesting thing. In the beginning of Parshas Kisavo, it says, if you look at Pasuk, beginning of Parshas Kisavo, Parak Chavav, Pasuk Dalet, first of all, it says, V'lakach hakohen, this is the parasha about Bikurim. It says, V'lakach hakohen atenim yadecha, the Kohen will take the basket from your hands, V'hinicho, and he will place it, Lefnei Mizbach Hashem Kecha. He will place it in front of the Mizbeach of Hashem. He places it next to the Mizbeach. This is what we're talking about. So it says, the Torah says you have to place it. Now, if you look at Pasuk Yud, it says, so you say, right, it says you put it down in front of the Mizbeach, and then there's a whole bunch of psukim what you say, right? You answer all these things, you say all these things. If you look at Pasuk Yud, you say, Va'ata inei vesis reishis pri adama asher nasat Hashem. You say, now I brought the Bikurim which Hashem has given me. Now look what it says. V'hi nachto lefnei Hashem l'kecha. And you should place it in front of Hashem. Once again, put it down. So now in Pasuk Yud it says you put it down in front of the Mizbeach, and in Pasuk Hey you put it down, in Pasuk Dalet it says you put it down in front of the Mizbech. Why does it say it twice? So we have a rule in the Torah, when the Torah says the same thing twice, it's telling you not only is it a good idea, but it is 100% necessary. And if you don't do it, it doesn't work. So the Pashut understanding of these two psukim are, it's telling you, put it down. Why does it say it twice? To tell me, hanacha ma'akeves, that if you don't do it, if you don't put it down in front of the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to eat your bikurim. That's why the Torah said it twice. The first time it said it was to tell you it's a good idea. And the second time was telling you, now it's a good idea, but you better do it. And if you don't, then you're not yotzei. Shina alav hakasav la'akev is the terminology, which means the Torah doubled on it a second time to tell you that this is 100% necessary. And if you don't do it, you have not fulfilled your obligation. So the Gemara is saying is, again, we had a contradiction of Rabbi Yochanan. On one hand, Rabbi Yochanan said that the putting it down in front of the Mizbeach prevents the Kohen from eating it. If he didn't put it down, the Kohen's not allowed to eat it. So the Gemara's answer is, one is going like the Rabbanan who argue on Rabbi Yehuda, who hold, Pashup Shadla, as we just said, the fact that Torah said it twice tells me that you must do it, and therefore it prevents. Now, who's Rabbi Yehuda? We're about to see. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the reason it said v'hinachto a second time is for a totally different reason. It's not there to tell you that you must do it, and we'll see. Rabbi Yehuda has a different drush in Pasuk Yud, why you're putting it down, why it says putting it down a second time. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't have a second time v'hanachto to tell me that it prevents, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it does not prevent. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan, who said in one place it does not prevent, was going like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, who's Rabbi Yehuda? Let's be clear over here. The Gemara says, let's read again. Lo kasha Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbanan. My Rabbi Yehuda, who's Rabbi Yehuda? Detanya. We learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Imer. Rabbi Yehuda says, the pasuk says, quote, v'hinachto. The pasuk says, v'hinachto in pasuk Yud. Zu tnufa. This is referring to, this tells us that you're supposed to be waving the bikurim. You're supposed to pick it up and wave it in different directions. Like different karbanis, we know is a halacha, you're supposed to wave it, sort of like you do with your lulav. So Rabbi Yehuda says the word of the hinachto, place it, in Pasuk Yud, teaches me that obviously you're supposed to wave it. Now, the Gemara says, Ata omer zu tnufa, you're telling me, Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda talking, you're telling me it means I'm supposed to wave it? O eno ella, or maybe perhaps it's only hanacha mamish. Maybe when it says v'hinachto, it means you should put it down. It doesn't mean you should wave it. Even Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that the word v'hinachto means to wave it. But he's saying the fact that Torah says to put it down means you obviously waved it first. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, you might ask on me, how do I know that? Maybe v'hinachto means put it down. Nothing to do. Just here the Torah is telling me they're supposed to put it down. So Rabbi Yehuda said, Kishu Omer, when it says in Pasuk Dalid, quote, v'hinicho, it already said in Pasuk Dalid, you should place it. It says you should put it in front of the Mizbeach. Hare, behold, hanach amar, behold, we already spoke about placing it. Hamani mekayim, behold, ma'ani mekayim, what do I establish with the words, quote, v'hinachto? In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is asking a question. He's saying, Pasuk Dalet says, I put it down. Now, why does Pasuk Yud say put it down again? You can't, something that you put down already, you can't put down a second time. You already put it down. Right? So Rabbi Yehuda says, the second time it says put it down was to tell me, you put it down, you say the psukim, and then you pick it up again and you wave it with the Kohen. You wave the bikurim up and down, the four directions, to show that Hashem is all over the world. And then, v'hinachto, then you put it back down. So Rabbi Yehuda is teaching you, this is the source to tell you that there's a concept of waving it. You won't find anywhere else, seemingly, where it says that you're supposed to wave the bikurim. This is Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that Rabbi Yehuda says, from the fact it says, put it down in Pasuk Daled, and then says, put it down again in Pasuk Yud, teaches me, obviously you're supposed to be waving it in between, and that's what it tells me, to put it down a second time after you waved it. This is a source for Rabbi Yehuda. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, can we say the Torah said it 2 times in order to make sure to tell you that it's 100% necessary, and if you don't do it, it holds back the eating of the bikurim? No, because it didn't say the same thing twice. It's teaching me a whole separate halacha. It's teaching me that you're supposed to do tnufa. As opposed to, if you argue on Rabbi Yehuda and you hold, let's say I learn out tnufa from some other source, which we'll see where that is. But if I have a different source to tell me tnufa, then why does it say, Rabbi Yehuda is asking a good question, why does it say v'nachto twice? To tell me that it's ma'akiv, that you must do it. And if you don't do it, you're not allowed to eat the bikurim. So that's what the Gemara is saying. So again, this is Rabbi Yehuda. So when the Gemara answers, Ha Rabbi Yehuda, Ha Rabbanan, what the Gemara is saying is that on one hand, Rabbi Yochanan said, putting it down is not ma'akev, that's like Rabbi Yehuda. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, putting it down is not ma'akev, because the Torah never said it twice. It said it twice, that's for a different reason. That's to tell me that you're supposed to wave it. Now, the other one where he said that you're supposed to put it, that you must, when Rabbi Yochanan said, you must put it down, and if you don't, that's ma'akev, that was going like the people who argue in Rabbi Yehuda. Who are the people who argue in Rabbi Yehuda? They hold you learn tnufa from a different source, the waving from a different source. Therefore, that frees up the pasuk of vihinachto to tell me a second time, putting it down to tell me that you really better put it down. And if you don't, it's ma'akev. And that's where Rabbi Yochanan was going like that. The Gemara says, first wide line now, Uman Tana, who's the Tana, the Palgalid Rabbi Yehuda? Who's this Tana that argues on Rabbi Yehuda and learns out the waving from somewhere else? Which means, and therefore Vahanachto is doubled up. The Tanya, Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov here. The Gemara says it's Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov. Who's Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov? The Tanya, Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov said, quote, V'lakach ha-kohen atenim yadecha. It says the Kohen takes it mi yadecha. If you look at Pasuk Yud, Pasuk Daled, it says the Kohen takes it from your hands. Limed al bikurim shetunim tnufa. He learns from that pasuk mi yadecha, from your hands. That teaches that it needs tnufa. Divrei Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov. These are the words of Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov. And the brisa. For our purposes, what do we see? We'll see in a second how he learned this out. But if he learns out from the word yadecha somehow, your hands, that means that you're doing tnufa. So you have to ask a question now. According to Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov, why does it say v'hiniach in pasuk Daled and says v'hinachto a second time in pasuk Yud? You know why? To tell you that it's 100% necessary, and if you don't do it, you're not allowed to eat bikurim. So they have very good machlokas, Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov, if hanacha is ma'akev, if you don't put it down, you're not allowed to eat the bikurim, because the Torah says it twice. If it says the same word twice, that's to not teach you anything else. It's to teach you that you must do it. That's what Rabbi Yochanan meant, hanacha ma'akeves. When Rabbi Yochanan said hanacha is not ma'akeves, that was going like Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the word vihinachto a second time was teaching me the halacha that you're supposed to do tnufa in between. You're supposed to wave it. Therefore, it doesn't say it twice. Therefore, you're supposed to do it, but if you don't, it's not ma'akev. Now, the Gemara may be wondering, according to Yezr ben Yaakov, where do you see tnufa waving from the word miyadecha? The Gemara says, my time Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov, what's the source of Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov? What's the reason of him? Asya, he brings yad mishlamim. He makes a gzera shava, the word yad, from shlamim. Ksiv hach, it says over here by us, quote, v'lakach ha-kohen tenem yadecha, mi yadecha, end quote. It says the Kohen takes it from your hand. Key word, yad. The ksiv, and it says by the carbon shlamim, it says over there, quote, yado tivienu es ishe Hashem. It says his hands will bring the offering of Hashem, end quote. Now there we know it's referring to the owner brings it, and the owner waves it by carbon shlamim. Now, the Gzera Shava tells me that you compare these two things. Makan Kohen, just like over here, it's referring to the Kohen, right? It says the Kohen takes it in his hands. Af lahalan Kohen, so too by the carbon shlamim, tells me the Kohen is supposed to do it. In other words, Pashup Shat in the Psukim by carbon shlamim, it sounds like the owner holds it in his hands. How do you know also a Kohen holds it? The Gzera Shava tells you apply what it says by Bikurim, by us, to carbon shlamim. So carbon shlamim is not just the owner, it's also the Kohen. And Malahalan Balam, just like over there it's referring to the owner, Afkan Balam, so too over here also it's referring to the owner. Meaning, just like by carbon shlamim, I know Yad is referring to the owner, so too by Bikurim, where Yad it says Kohen, it's also the owner. So in other words, you cross-reference. Bikurim it says Kohen is holding it, by Shlamim it says the owner is holding it. Cross-reference, which means both places, both of them hold it, the Kohen and the owner hold it together. Ha-Ketzad, how is this? Meniach Kohen Yadav Tachas Yad Balam, the Kohen places his hand under the hand of the owner, puts his hand underneath him, either means literally underneath, or it means, actually, there's some Rishonim say, one holds it on the top and the Kohen holds it from the bottom, Umenif, and you wave it. So this is the source of Rabbi Yezr ben Yaakov that you're supposed to wave. From the Gzera Shava tells you you're supposed to wave it. Which means, the reason why I wrote V'hinachto in Pasuk Yud was not to tell me you wave it. It was to tell me that Hanacha is Ma'akev. Good, that's the end of that. So if we could just review what we had over here. We started with Rav Gidol in the name of Rav, who said that a Kohen who eats from the Chatas before the sprinkling of the blood, he's going to get Malchus, because a negative commandment derived from positive commandment has the halacha of a negative commandment. You get Malchus for that. To which Rava asked, what are you talking about? We know by the animals, the Torah says you should eat it if it has two signs, which we can imply, don't eat it if it doesn't have two signs. And still, the Torah went out of its way to give me a special negative commandment, don't eat it if it doesn't have two signs. What does that tell you? That tells you that a negative commandment derived from positive commandment only has the power of an asay, therefore you're not going to get malchus. So what did Rav Gidol really say? So Rav is saying that can't be what Rav Gidol said. So Gemara said what Rav Gidol really said was that if a zar, a non-Kohen, eats the chatas ashim meat before the sprinkling of blood, he does not get malchus. Even though there's a pasuk that says a zar, a non-Kohen who eats the meat will get malchus, that's only if you're able to read the beginning of the pasuk, which says, eat the meat because you are atoned, then we apply the end, don't eat it if you're not a Kohen. But if it's before the sprinkling of blood, where even the Kohen doesn't eat it, so then even the non-Kohen who eats it does not get malchus for that. That was that, and then we went off into Rabbi Lazar said name Rabbi Yeshua, Rav Hoshia, that Bikurim, placing it prevents. If you don't place it down before the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to eat the Bikurim, but reading does not. In other words, if you don't read the Psukim, it does not prevent you from eating the Bikurim, to which the Gemara asks, what do you mean? But Rabbi Lazar has stated that if you picked it before Sukkot and you bring it after Sukkot, you have to let the fruit rot. Is it not because you're not able to read it? So we see not able to read it does prevent. The Gemara answered like Reb Zera. What's Reb Zera? That something that you don't do is okay, but at least has to have the ability that I could have done it if I wanted to. So picking it before Sukkot and bringing it after Sukkot, you don't have the ability to read it. That's a problem. But if you actually didn't read it in a normal situation, that's okay. Good. Then we said Rav Acha learned the same halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that putting it down prevents, reading does not prevent. The Gemara asked, but we have a contradiction, because they asked Rabbi Yochanan, when is the Kohen allowed to eat the Bikurim? And he said, if it's fit for a reading, only once you read it. And if it's not fit, then once you put it in once it comes into the azara, the courtyard. So it's a double contradiction. So the Gemara answered, reading is not a question. One's Reb Shimon, one's Rabbanan. What about putting down on putting down? One place it says putting it down prevents, one place it says does not prevent. The Gemara's answer basically is that when Pasuk Daled and Pasuk Yud, where it says you put it down, and then you put it down a second time, if you hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the point of the second time the Torah is saying it is to tell you that it prevents. Not only should you put it down, but you better put it down, and if you don't, you're not Yotze. How does he know Tnufa? He knows Tnufa from Gzer Shava. As opposed to Rabbi Yehuda himself, Rabbi Yehuda holds, the second Pasuk has come to tell me that's the source I know that you waive the Bikurim. Therefore, it doesn't say Vehenachta a second time for no good reason. It says it to teach me Tnufa. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Hanacha does not prevent. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Hanacha does not prevent. Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a contradiction. One place is going like Rabbi Yehuda, one place he's going like the Rabbanan, which is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov.